Point to consider as we focus on agriculture to ensure adequate food sustainability across Guyana is the fact that with the oil and gas sector coming on stream, it is expected through the analysis that the population is expected to grow by almost 2.5 times the normal. This in itself will push the population just about over 2.4, 2.5 million if we're careful. Now with this, bearing this in mind, then there's need to boost our present level of production to meet that ever-growing demands. And to achieve this, it means we would have to find ways in accelerating the growth rates among all species. And let's say, for example, the broilers. There are things that we can do to ensure that our broilers grow at the rate at which they should. And so some of these things we would have known a long time now. And so it's not a difficult thing for us to do. For example, our brooding. We should ensure that our brooding temperatures is within range. If we don't keep the temperatures at 95 degrees Fahrenheit during our brooding stage, then the birds would not have adequate temperatures, and so the growth rate that is expected can be compromised at the very stage. Another critical area that we need to look at is litter management. Many of us don't see the need. For some workers, they would just cover the wet areas. And so litter basically serves three functions. One, they absorb the watery portions from the feces. Another good function is that it contains microbial activity. It controls it. Because when the litter starts disintegrating and it starts breaking up, it tends to destroy the eco-loving bacteria. And then last but not least, another major function is to provide insulation for the birds. These three factors must always be considered, and we must always ensure that the litter is well kept, it is dry, to actually perform the necessary functions. Now, what poultry rearers, the young poultry rearers, the ones now getting into the business to push poultry production, they're making a simple mistake. Now, when adjusting the bins and waterers, it is quite important that the lip of the bin should be at the height of the back of the bird. Now, bearing that in mind, we must also consider the capabilities of the feeder, because usually the feeders, which is roughly 25-pound feeders, the rim of the bin actually takes care of 25 to a maximum of 33 birds per bin. So roughly from calculations we would say 3 bins per 100 birds. But the automatic waterers, the bell waterers, would go as high as 75 birds per waterers. Now, a critical area that tends to affect the birds is heat stress. And so we must find ways to count it. Now, one of the ways that we would have done in the past, sometimes we tend to paint the tanks that are black into white so it reflects the light instead of holding it. This tends to ensure that the water is much cooler so the bird can have a greater uptake of water as it needs be, because most animals tend to eat to meet the metabolic heat level, and as such, when this level is reached, they may not be able to actually consume food at the level for the maintenance and growth areas, but they will just focus on coming off the feed as soon as the point that they're much dissatisfied. And then we have other issues, because if the litter is compromised, and let's say the litter is wet, there is issues with the birds being in a situation where they can have coccidiosis, because what would happen is the microorganisms would gain access to the digestive system, and from there a whole host of trouble will happen. What we'd find is that sickness will eventually happen. You will find blood in the drop-ins, and these things tend to actually affect the level of production and reduce the growth rate, apart from other issues such as coccidiosis, CRD, chronic respiratory disease. So if we can control these factors as well as control our lighting program, then we can be able to at some point in time to accelerate our growth rate, because it is expected that the bird should be able to grow at 1 pound per week per age. So you're aiming for 6 pounds in 6 weeks. In so doing, we can be able to manage the operations much more successfully. Now, what is critical is the height of the bin and the flow rate of the bin. Now, if you observe the bins that are actually manufactured or produced now, they have 3 holes of adjustment. If we don't slow down the feed rate of the bin by putting in some instances, we can adjust the bin because the bins have adjusters. In other instances, what would happen is that we have to put obstacles within the bin to slow down the flow rate, because if we don't, what you find happening is the feed will actually come out of the bin onto the ground, and then it will be a recipe for disaster for the broiler birds. So these are things that are critical, we must pay attention to. And then even areas with flopping zincs, if there is any defective area, if the pen is leaking, these are all areas that can actually impede and the rate at which our birds are expected to function. And so if we can curb these areas, then we can be able to maximize our level of production. Now, another critical area is in relation to COVID. With this in mind, I know that most farmers would tend to stock the feed supplies in large numbers to cater for the whole batch. Now, this by itself has a dilemma. The expected feed life of the feed is about 30 days. But because of the fact that how the factories usually operate, the feed would usually spend 3 to 5 days within the area unless you catch the feed fresh. Now, if the feed is 5 days old, remember we have conditions where you have preservatives in the feed that will carry the feed for a particular period of time. So if we are mindful as to that period in time, we can well have feed that can later on pick up fungus or mold, and this would tend to increase the toxicity and cause difficulties with the birds and result in death. This is something that we should be very mindful of. You will find the feed stuff having cakes in them, and so when this situation occurs, it's advisable to remove those cakes. In instances where we can avoid using the feed, we should do so, because the aflatoxins in the feed can in some way impact on the birds. If the birds are young, it can result in death. One way to check it is if we use young ducklings and we feed the feed to the young ducklings, what you will find is that the birds will die, because the condition is actually referred to as aflatoxicosis, and this is very detrimental to our animals. We test it on the ducks and you'll see the impact it will have. So viewers, it is critical that you pay attention to all these things if you would like to actually accelerate your profitability and improve your performance of your broiler birds while you are in production. It is critical that we do those things, because if we are to actually gain, let's say you're moving from 4.5 to 6 pounds per batch, we're talking about 1.5 pounds. Now, if we can at the same time manage our feed, because if we are saying you want, let's say, feed conversion ratio of 2 to 1, and you're talking about 6 pounds, we're talking about 12 pounds of feed. But if you factor in wastage, and let's say you lose half pound every time, and you move from half, so you were talking about 6 half pound, which is 3 pounds. You move from 12 pound feed to 15 pound feed. That 3 pounds of feed, which is $150, will tend to accelerate your cost of production and actually result in loss of revenue. So bear these things in mind, and as you take your livestock production seriously, as you focus on improving profitability in the poultry sector, primarily the broilers, you too can benefit. I do hope that the information presented to you is quite informative, and I do hope that you will like and subscribe to this video, and you'll be able to see much more as they are presented in a not so distant future as we tackle the COVID situation, as well as the explosion that we expect shortly with the oil and gas sector. So my encouragement to you is stay safe, play it safe, and God bless. Keep alive.